somebody. And there's some serious problems happening in our Attorney General's office, and people need to know. And the best way to hold the Attorney General accountable, and the best chance we have right now, is to get a new one. And so I think it'll be a very interesting interview, and you'll get some great information. Also today, I'm gonna show you a video, a couple of interviews I had down with Greg Wurzel, who's running for the Minnesota Supreme Court, and Jill Clark, who's trying to run for the Minnesota Supreme Court, but tricks and games have been played, so that's preventing her as of right now from happening. But there was a court case at the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals downtown St. Paul in the federal building, where they presented their case as to why they should get to run for the Supreme Court, and specifically for Chief Justice. So we'll have that interview. We'll also show an interview of a man being tasered at the State Fair in Minnesota, and give you some other tips as to what's happening in that case and insight into that case. It will interest you, and not a pleasant thing. Also, we'll tell you about the seatbelt laws. Again, no primary seatbelt law in Minnesota, and your solution to that. Discuss a little bit on the Pedders fraud, the second fraud that's taking place there. And so, and may get to some other things. One other thing, today, 40 Days for Life started again today. Pro-Life Action Ministries down at Regent Hospitals, again for 40 days, 24 hours around the clock. They'll have prayer and protests. I'm protesting abortions. Again, Regent's Hospital, the only hospital in the United States that performs abortions that we know of. And we just want to see that stop, and it's at, right there with the Children's Hospital, which they proudly proclaim we are saving children's lives and taking care of children, and at the back door they are killing babies, and it's just not a good situation there. So remember that. You can go down to Regent's Hospital and stand with them and pray with them, and be involved in that. Well, we got a busy schedule, a lot of tape to watch, so we're just going to get right into the Greg Wurzel interview and Jill Clark, and they pretty much explain what's going on in the interview, so I won't give you a whole lot of detail, except to say this is happening downtown St. Paul at the federal courthouse, where the 8th Circuit Appellate Court is having a hearing, held the hearing just this last Monday. It was at 2 p.m., I think. So let's roll the tape and see what they say. And first up is Greg Wurzel, who is running for the Minnesota Supreme Court, but you came down here in a lawsuit against Secretary of State Mark Ritchie. So what is this lawsuit all about? Well,
it's about trying to force the position of Chief Justice on the ballot. It's been, the last time we elected a Chief Justice was in the year 2000, and since then we've had a series of resignation appointments, resignation followed by appointments, resignation and appointments, and we never have an election. So we're saying you have to have elections in this state, and we need to elect a Chief Justice.
So the Minnesota Constitution says we need to elect our judges, but they brought in a provision, or it's also in the Constitution, that judges can be appointed if there's a vacancy. But your sense is that they're really, by that other piece, they're really taking away the election.
Well, this is the first time in March of this year that the Minnesota Supreme Court came across with such an extreme interpretation of the Minnesota Constitution. They came up with an interpretation that would allow serial resignation and appointments, and that could go on indefinitely. In fact, in oral argument, the Attorney General was asked if it could go on for 100 years, and if that would be a problem, and he said 100 years would not be a problem. Well, again, that is a problem when you have a constitution that says judges are to be elected.
So in the federal court here, you're basically taking it to the federal court saying,
like lasagna or delicate pasta like filled pasta, more water in proportion. 6 quarts for a pound of dry pasta. So once this comes up to a boil,
interpretation of the Minnesota Constitution given to it by the Minnesota Supreme Court just this March. Prior to that, I think everyone assumed you would have elections in this state. And now it's no longer fair to assume that you're going to have an election.
And your impression of what took place the other day with the questioning of the judges that were on the bench, did you get any feeling as to how they were going to respond or react to this?
You're talking about the hearing today?
The hearing today.
Well, again, I think there's some real technical arguments being made about various doctrines, and I think Jill can maybe address that better than I can. But you know, I think some of them seem to be concerned about what has happened here in Minnesota, and we'll just have to see what their decision is.
All right, thank you, Greg.
Yep.
Here with Jill Clark, and Jill Clark, you're here suing Secretary of State Mark Ritchie because you want to run for Supreme Court Justice, and right now you can't. Is that correct?
I can't run for Supreme Court Justice in 2010, and unfortunately there hasn't been an election since the year 2000. So it's not just me that can't run. No one seems to be able to run at all, ever, and we're very, very concerned at the pattern we see of every 2 years a resignation from the most important seat in the Minnesota justice system, and then an appointment. It almost seems like there's a plan: 2 years, resign, 2 years, resign, 2 years, resign. That's bad for the state, and we have no continuity in our Chief Justice. The elections should occur.
So you were the one that argued the case here in the court for your side, and what was your sense of the questions that the judges were asking? How did you feel? Did you get an impression as to were they leaning one way or the other, or did they get a gist of what was actually taking place?
Well, it's always difficult to predict how any particular panel would decide any particular case, and most attorneys don't do that. We've essentially given up on that. That is to say, we do our jobs the best we can. I answer the questions as best I can. I really don't know how this will come out. But, I mean, obviously the court had some concerns. I think because of the procedural route that this case took getting here, it was just last week that a stay was issued and that the Eighth Circuit really took on the Rooker-Feldman issue. I think that's why that took a lot of the oral argument time. Because
now you mentioned a stay was issued. Who issued a stay and in what case?
Sure. In this case, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals issued a stay last week that stayed the trial court proceedings pending the outcome of the appeal. Essentially, that nothing could occur at the trial court about this case as stated in the order.
Okay.
So stay just means kind of held in abeyance is a different way of saying it.
So can the state still go ahead with the election process, or does that have to stop for the Chief Judge of Minnesota?
No, right now the election process is moving forward, and that is to say there is no Chief Justice election for the November ballot at this time. So we would be looking to this court to order an election.
One thing these judges seem to be arguing is that, well, you should have gone straight to the U.S. Supreme Court rather than through the U.S. district courts as a procedural matter, and they kind of seem to be honing in on that. But my impression that I got from there that they've almost convoluted this whole thing that nobody can really have any clear spelled out avenue in which to go.
Well, and that was the fairness argument that the appellants made at the end there, that essentially there are a number of federal abstention bars. Most of them are not jurisdictional. Rooker-Feldman is a jurisdictional bar. But most of them are not jurisdictional, but they all could spring into play at any moment. And appellant's view is that we have to be able to get to this court. And what the Pullman abstention bar tells us, another abstention bar, is that we have to come armed with an interpretation from the Minnesota Supreme Court. Now, there is a different way that it can be done. This came up in oral argument in a case in Hawaii. The litigants went first to federal court. The federal court certified the issue back to the Hawaii State Supreme Court, and then that ruling came back. The problem was time is of the essence. I mean, even today, the state appellees are arguing it's too late. The ballots are already printed. So you have a limited amount of time in election cases to do what you need to do. Juggling all of those things, we decided we had to go under a particular statute. You can challenge a ballot directly in the Minnesota Supreme Court. You don't have to start at the trial court of appeals and then go to the Supreme Court. You can go immediately there. That's a fairly quick process. We decided we needed to do that first. Or risk that we would never get into federal court, back to state court, back to federal court, and then up to the 8th Circuit before the election.
Another interesting twist in this was that you're requesting that a special election be held if the court rules in your favor, or what was going on there?
Sure, because of timing now, it's September 20th, and the state is already arguing that the ballots are out. We said, given that time has elapsed since our briefing, we'd like to add a request for relief, which is a special election. And that's when I cited this 5th Circuit case from 1981, where in fact the federal court ordered that a state Supreme Court justice seat be run in a special election.
And so it's happened before, and they can do it. And basically, Mark Ritchie would have to print up another $2 million ballots with just that Chief Justice seat on the ballot.
If a special election is ordered, any special election, that's the case. I mean...
Well, would this special election take place November 2nd, or would it be in January?
It could take place later.
Okay.
It could take place later. It all depends on what the court does, if the court provides the relief. But in any special election, obviously ballots are printed for the special election. And I want to point out it was the state that demanded 30 days to file their brief at the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. Those 30 days would be enough. I mean, those 30 days could have cost us the ability to get relief in this case, and that doesn't seem right. I mean, the state should not be able to have it both ways. We ask for the delay as the state appellees. We want 30 days to brief it, but now September 20th, it's too late. In other words, if this was August 20th when we were standing here, we would perhaps have more options. So it seems the state made its choice early on to seek delay or to play out the proceedings to take longer. Therefore, if the state ended up having to bite the bullet and pay for the special election, I guess that would be one of the consequences of the state appellee's choice.
Walking away from this, what do you, kind of what's your general overall impression of the hearing today, not only that, but can the 8th Circuit say you got to have a special election, and how much does that stick? I mean, can that be appealed, or how much weight does this 8th Circuit appellate decision play into the fact that the state would have to actually do something?
Right. There is a statute that instructs the Secretary of State to modify any state election procedure to comply with a federal court order. So could the state appeal? What they could do if, in fact, this 8th Circuit panel grants relief to the appellants, they could ask that the 8th Circuit convene itself en banc, in other words, all of the judges of the 8th Circuit, and ask the en banc court to overrule the panel. That's very seldom done. They need to request that relief anyway, and then they could go to the United States Supreme Court and ask that court to take review. But as we all know, that's not an appeal of right to the United States Supreme Court.
Right.
The United States Supreme Court picks and chooses which cases it wants to take. So for most cases, a ruling by this panel would be pretty final.
Okay, any last thing you want to say is an impression of the hearing? Any detail that kind of you'd like to say that jumps to your attention?
Well, it's always a pleasure, because when you work as the attorney on a case and brief everything, it's great to have a repartee with the judges. Intellectual minds really trying to have a discourse that illuminates the issues. I just always enjoy appellate advocacy. A lot of fun.
Yeah, this is one more question I was thinking. That they were bringing up that the state Supreme Court, you were bringing up that the Minnesota State Supreme Court did not answer your constitutional questions down there.
Right.
And, I mean, that sounds weird to me. Why wouldn't they answer those questions since you brought them up? And is there a strategy? Do they even have to, I guess?
Well, do they have to? I mean, I guess the question is, for many courts, I mean, do they have to do certain things? We think they have to follow the law. We think Minnesota Supreme Court has to follow the law. But unfortunately, strategically, could have been in the minds of that court